Welcome to Make a Memory Bear. Today we're making Peanut the mini dog. Here's Peanut. He's just a little guy. He's about 8 inches tall. Step 1 is to print out the pattern and the instructions. The link to purchase the pattern is in the description box below. For supplies, you're going to need scissors, needle and matching thread, pins, a seam ripper is optional but it's helpful, and a small bag of stuffing. And this isn't required, but I make all of my memory bears with a sewing machine. This is certainly a pattern that you could sew by hand as well. I highly recommend using safety eyes and noses, especially if your mini dog is for a child. You'll need approximately 1/3 yard of fabric total for this mini dog, or 1 shirt. I'm going to be making my mini dog out of a shirt and also some of this fuzzy white material. When you're choosing your fabric or your clothing to make this mini dog, there are some fabrics that have a very clear right side and a very clear wrong side. Both of the materials that I'll be using today have a right side and a wrong side. So this one's fuzzy on one side, smooth on the other. There are other materials that the fabric is the same on both the front and the back, and this is highly recommended if you're brand new to sewing or if you're a beginner. You will notice many of the pattern pieces say something like cut 2 and 1 reverse. This means you're going to cut one pattern piece out just as it's written, and then you're going to reverse it. You're going to flip it over, and you're going to cut one out going the opposite direction. However, if you've got a fabric where it's the same print on the inside and the outside, this reverse 2 does not apply, because you can just flip the material after you cut out all the pieces in whatever direction you need it. So this only applies if you have a fabric like I do, where there's a clear right and wrong side. We're going to cut the number of pieces forward that it says to, and then the number of pieces reverse that we need to. Or you can do a trick like I'm going to show you here. I am just going to take my shirt, I'm going to turn it inside out so that the right sides of the fabric are touching. And so I've got it folded over. Now I'm just going to cut one time. And it's automatically going to cut one out the right way, and it's going to cut one out reverse for me. So that's going to cut down on the number of cuts I have to make. So now I've got my shirt turned inside out so that the right sides are touching and it's doubled up. And I'm going to start pinning all of my pattern pieces to the shirt. And now I'm going to cut the pattern pieces out. I decided to make my entire mini dog out of the shirt, and I'm only cutting the ears and the tail out of the white fuzzy material. And now that all of our pattern pieces are cut out of the material, we are ready to sew. We're starting with seam A on the face of the mini dog, which runs both above and below the mouth. Remove the paper pattern piece and then put some pins into the face and then sew seam A. Next, we're going to be sewing the mouth on the face of the dog. So to do that, we're going to pull apart our two pieces of fabric. And we're going to create the mouth area by lining up that seam A that we just sewed. We want that to line up on the top and the bottom of the pattern piece. And we created these little flaps when we sewed seam A. And if you are a professional or if you are really fancy, you can take the time to iron that seam flat. But I don't have the time or the desire to worry about that. So I'm going to do my best to just lay them down and then pin those into place. That will help the mouth look a little bit more smooth once we sew it. So just put several pins in place along this new mouth seam and then sew it into place. Now let's turn it right side out just to make sure that we're on track so far. We should have that center seam A that goes straight down the middle, and now we have a new little mouth seam. And just for future reference, these little triangles are always the top of the face. So keep that in mind for future reference. Next, we're going to sew the ears. So again, remove the paper pattern piece, and we're going to separate this into, we have 4 pieces, and we're going to separate it into 2 distinct ears. We're going to make sure that our right sides of the fabric are touching. We're going to pin these in place so they don't slide around while we're sewing. And then we're just going right around the perimeter. Using a sharp pair of scissors, we're going to make several small cuts right around the curved part of the ear. This is called clipping the curve. We do this several times throughout the pattern, and it helps the seam lay a little flatter when we turn it right side out. Repeat the process for the second ear. I wanted to give you a variation for the ears. The mini dog, as we're making it, is similar to this blue little guy. He's got flat ears that just lay straight on his head, and I think he's absolutely precious as he is. However, here's an alternative, which is where I folded the ear before I sewed it to the head, and it helps them kind of pop off the face a little bit. And I'll show you how to do that. Regardless of the method, you want to use these little triangles at the top of the face as the guidepost as to where to place the ears. So for the flat method, you just put it right up against the edge of that triangle, you pin it, and you sew it. That's how we're going to be doing it in this tutorial. However, you could also choose to simply fold the ear partially in half or all the way in half, and then you pin it next to the triangle and sew it into place to give that lifted appearance. This is your little mini dog, so you can do little variations like this throughout the pattern to make it your own. So for this tutorial, we're going to be following the directions of the pattern, and we're going to be adhering the ear flat right where it's indicated on the face, and we're going to be using the little triangle notch as our guidepost. We're just going to pin our ears and then we'll sew them into place. Next, we're going to be sewing the arms. So we should have 4 pieces of fabric. We are going to separate that into 2 separate arms. We need to make sure that the right sides of the fabric are together. And this is going to be a lot like the ears were, where we're going to have the right sides together. We're going to sew around the perimeter. And we do want to make sure that we do not sew right up at the top where that flat edge is. We need to leave that open because we're going to be adding a little bit of stuffing in a moment. We're going to clip the curves just like we did on the ear. Make sure you never cut past the seam that we just sewed. And then when you turn these arms right side out, these are tiny little arms, so it does take some finagling. Just be sure you're gentle. And repeat the process for the second arm. I wanted to show you a cute little variation for the arms. I made these little guys so it looks like they have hands and almost like they're wearing pajamas. And I think this is such a precious little look. The way that I achieve this is so simple. All I do is I take the arm pattern, I cut the very end off. That's the piece that's going to become the hand. And then the larger arm part is going to be the pajamas essentially. So I would cut the hand part out of the same fabric that I used for the face, and I would cut the arm part out of the fabric that I used for the pajamas. The front of the body is up next, and this is very simple. We're just going to be sewing along seam A. I make sure that my right sides of my fabric are together, put just a couple pins to hold it together, and then I zip along seam A. We're going back to the arms, and now we're going to be adding a little bit of stuffing. You can make these arms as firm or as squishy as you would like. Be sure that when you are stuffing the arms though, that you don't put too much right up at that opening, because we are going to be attaching these arms to the body of the bear, and we need to be able to get these arms under the footer of our sewing machine, and we need the needle to get through all the layers. So make sure that you leave that opening free of stuffing. Okay, we're ready to attach the arms to the body of the bear. And this is a two-step process. So grab the body, see these little triangle notches? That is the top. That's where we're going to be attaching these arms. And the first thing we want to do is just pin them into place. So this is what it should look like after the first step. Now we're going to take the face. And if you remember, the triangles are the top, so we want to take the other edge. This is the neck of the head, and we're going to be attaching it to the body. So flip it over so that these right sides are together. Starting with that center seam, we want the seam that goes down the body and up the middle of that face. We want those to line up. We're going to put a couple of pins right there. And then we're just going to take those temporary pins that we use to hold the arm in place, and we're going to put those through all 3 layers, the face, the arm, and the body, so that it's well and secured. And as soon as we have everything pinned and ready to go, then we're going to sew straight across seam B, which is the neck of the mini dog. We are ready to attach the safety eyes and nose onto our mini dog, and you can use the pattern as a guide, but quite frankly, you can put the eyes and nose wherever you like it. This is just a suggestion. Once you decide on the placement, grab your seam ripper, and you are going to make the tiniest little starter hole, and make sure that you do it directly into the fabric and not into the seam. If you put it in the seam, you're at risk of ripping the entire seam out. So do it right off to the side, tiny little starter hole, and then attach your safety nose. And then we're ready to attach the eyes, and this pattern again gives you a rough idea. Now what I strongly recommend is fold the face in half along that seam, take your seam ripper and make sure you poke it all the way through so it goes through both sides of the face, and then make a tiny starter hole. That way you know for sure your dog's eyes are going to be lined up. The back of the head is another one where it's just a really quick zip along seam A, and just remember it's not the side with the triangle, it's the other side. The tail is next, and it's a lot like the arms were, where we're going to be sewing around the perimeter, but not the end where we add the stuffing in just a moment. So go ahead and pin it into place and then sew along the perimeter. When you get to the point of the tail, put your needle down, pop up that footer, whip it around, and then sew the other edge of the tail. Clip the curves And if you have a lot of excess material like I do with this really fluffy stuff, you can clip some of that extra off so that the tail lays flatter when you flip it right side out. We're going to add just the tiniest little pinch of stuffing into the tail, and then we're going to set it off to the side. We'll need it in just a moment. We are ready to do the back of the mini dog. And this one is a little bit different from any others that we've done. We're actually going to be starting with the dart. So we're going to separate our two pattern pieces into single pieces of fabric. And we're going to be folding the material towards those triangles. We're going to pin it and we're going to sew it along that little dart. So when you have your pattern pieces lying down facing each other, make sure they're going in opposite directions. Fold from the center towards the triangles on both pieces, and then pin it and sew it into place. It's really important that they're facing the correct way at the time that you pin them. Once the darts are sewn, lay your pattern pieces down with the right sides facing up. Grab your little tail, and we're going to be temporarily pinning it right below the little triangle notch. This is similar to how we attach the arms, so these are just temporary pins that we're putting into place right now. Now we're going to take the other back piece, flip it over so that the right sides are together as always, and we're going to pin the two pieces together with the tail in between the two pieces. It should look like this, and we're going to be sewing a little bit right at the top and then right at the bottom, but we're leaving that center part between the two triangle notches open because that's going to be our stuffing hole for the mini dog when we're done. So it should look like this, where you have a stuffing hole in the middle of the back, and your tail should be sewn between the two back pieces like this. Next, we're going to be attaching the back of the head to the back of the body, and This is a similar process that we did on the front, but a little less complicated. The little triangles are the top of the head, and it's smooth at the neck, so flip it upside down so that the right sides can be together. Start with the seam that runs down the head and the body, line that up first and pin it into place, then add some additional pins and then sew right along seam B to attach the head to the body. We are ready for the legs, and you can separate these into 4 single leg pieces. I'm going to be starting with the back of my mini dog, so I grab 2 of the leg pieces, get them in the right spot so that their toes are facing up towards the head, and I'm just going to put it into place, pin it, and sew it on each leg. The back of the mini dog should look like this once the legs are attached. It's the exact same process for the front of the mini dog, so take your 2 remaining leg pieces, make sure the toes are facing up towards the head of the dog, and then pin and sew those into place. Okay, we're ready for a really big step. At this point, we're ready to attach the front of the bear to the back. So I'm taking these ears, I am stuffing them into the face so that the face is almost inside out, and then I'm taking the back of the bear, flipping it so that the right sides are together. I like to start at the very top of the bear at the center seam, make sure it's lined up with the face, and I'm going to just start adding a bunch of pins. Once I get several pins right around the top of the head and into the ears, then I'm going to move to the neck. Again, I'm making sure that that seam that's on the front of the dog and the back of the dog is perfectly lined up. I'll go from one side of the neck over to the second, and I'm putting a couple of pins there. I'm then going to finish off the face and the head by adding several more pins, and I'm just really taking my time here and making sure that the edges are perfectly lined up. Sometimes I have to pull it a little bit taut, kind of maneuver a little bit, because I do want it to be nice and lined up when I pin it. And now we'll flip to the bottom of the dog to that center seam once again, making sure that the front and the back is lined up and then pinning it into place. Next, we want to find that seam where the leg attaches to the body, and we're going to put a pin there so that that is lined up on the front and the back of the dog. We'll do that for both legs. And then we also need to flip it over so that we can put a pin on the side of the body where those two leg joints meet, and we'll put a pin there as well. And then we just stick one or a couple on the side, but make sure that the arm is tucked in so that we don't sew over that. Once all of your joints are lined up and pinned, then it's time to put some pins in the actual legs themselves. And you want to use as few or as many pins as you feel comfortable with, because this is going to be a really big step that we're about to take. We're going to be sewing the entire perimeter of this dog. So take your time and put a lot of pins in it. Get it all ready to go before we start sewing it. And now we're ready to sew around the entire dog. I like to start up at the top of the head, but you could just as easily start down at the bottom of the bear. It doesn't really matter because essentially we're going to be going around the entire perimeter. But I do recommend just going nice and slow. There is no reason to rush through this step. Taking your pins out as you go, making sure the ears are tucked in, and then when you get to places like the neck, take your time to flatten out the material. Make sure those arms are tucked inside. Go nice and slow. When I get to points like this leg, I put my needle down, I flip the material around. I want everything to be nice and smooth. Right at these toes, I go back and forth, forward and reverse a couple of times to make sure that toe is reinforced. I don't want the seam to rip out later. And then, like I said, I just go around nice and slow. It's a big step. I don't want to run off my path. I want to make sure that I don't have any holes or gaps when I'm done. Once the perimeter is sewn, it's time to do the dart for the toe. This is very similar to how we did the mouth. We're going to pull the pieces of fabric apart. We're going to make sure the seam is centered right down the middle of the toe. We're going to put a pin or two in place, and then we're going to sew it straight across. I like the toe to lay flat when I turn this inside out, so I like to trim some of that excess fabric off once I sew that seam. And repeat on the other foot. We're ready to turn the dog right side out, so find your stuffing hole in the back and reach in. I like to start with the arms because they're kind of bulky since they've got stuffing in them already. And then you can pull the rest of the dog through the hole. Just be gentle because it is a little bit of a tight fit. We're going to be stuffing the legs next, so grab some stuffing, and just like we did with the arms, go ahead and make it as firm or as squishy as you want to down at the end by the toes. But where the leg attaches to the body, make sure that you don't have any stuffing there, because we are going to be sewing over that seam where the leg connects to the body. So make it as firm or squishy as you want to, just don't put a lot of stuffing right up next to the body. I typically don't use pins for this step, but you absolutely could. What we're going to be doing is lining the existing seam up with our needle, putting the footer down, and we're going to be sewing along that seam to make the leg kind of a floppy little leg. So take your time with this one. It can be a little bit of a challenge because we've got stuffing in the leg. And repeat on the other side. Now we're going to stuff the rest of the dog, and I start with the face and the head. I personally like to put a lot of stuffing into the face, into the head, to really make it firm so it holds its shape well. But again, this is your little mini dog, so you can make it as squishy or as firm as you like. The final step is to close up the stuffing hole with a needle and thread, and I prefer to use a ladder stitch. If you're not familiar with that, you can do a Google search and find some people that have made some really well done tutorials showing you specifically how to do this stitch. And now is the time to personalize your little mini dog. Add some bows, add some flowers, add a ribbon around its neck, make a little doggy collar for it. Do whatever you want to do to make this mini dog your own. And I hope it brings you or a loved one, a family member, a friend, lots of comfort and joy for years to come.